Hello and welcome to Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud. Together we'll explore ways to support teacher growth, elevate your coaching practice, and boost student success. Each week I'll share my own insights as well as conversations with inspiring guests to help you lead with confidence. Thanks for listening. Building Student Learning Perseverance. I'm pleased to welcome Colin Simpson to today's podcast. Colin is a teacher leader and department head of science at the American Cooperative School in Tunis. I've had the pleasure of learning and exploring teaching, coaching, and leadership with Colin over the past few years. He completed a micro-credential in instructional coaching, and Colin worked to extend coaching experiences among his department and his staff. I follow Colin on LinkedIn, and I asked him to join me for a conversation when I read the following post. Quote, I noticed something this semester in my grade 10 class. When the cognitive load rises, many students default to learned helplessness or passive habits. I see it in the quick, I don't get it, before they've engaged with the problem, or in the immediate search for confirmation rather than justification, and in the quiet, waiting for me to circulate rather than taking an initial attempt. Colin, thanks so much for agreeing to join me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to having a talk about this.
Well, first phrase I pulled out of what you said was cognitive load. What's your description of cognitive load?
So cognitive load, even going back to like the idea of cognitive load theory, is something that I've actually been working with since before I was a teacher. So teaching is a second career for me. And I was in training as a commercial pilot and worked in the industry for a short time. And so one of the things that they always taught us was about the cognitive load of flying an airplane. You have to become an expert in the little systems so that you have the space in your brain to deal with the emergencies when they happen. You don't have time to think, you have to be able to react. And so that was my initial introduction to it.
Wow. That's new for me. Thank you.
I had to leave some surprises here. So it really comes down to like the idea of when an emergency happens, you have to be trained to recognize those key ideas of what's happening, and then react before you really have a chance to think through it so that you can gain the time later to work through the problems. And so transferring that to a educational perspective, it comes back to sort of there's three concepts of cognitive load theory and like how your brain works with your working memory. And then there's the extraneous pieces that are going on, which are distractions and, or design, the lesson that doesn't flow nicely, the kids are distracted and losing what they're focused on. And then there's the actual period where you're going to be getting your growth. It's where you are making those connections to your previous learning and pushing things a little bit further. And with what I'm seeing with my students is that they are getting overwhelmed very quickly. And rather than trying to make those connections to their prior knowledge, when that overwhelmed state is happening, they are following back on sort of rote learning that they have done that has worked in the past. When I get stuck, if I wait, the teacher will take up the answer on the board before they ask me anything. And that's where I sort of started this year off with that grade 10 class.
A couple of things are coming to me. So I generally see this when I'm looking at math instruction. And in math, it's the student looks at the problem, and if it doesn't immediately look like a problem we've been taught to do, then I can't do it. So there's no series of questioning or a problem attack that steps in.
Yeah, that's the traditional one, right? The student learns how to do the multiplication problem when explained as multiplication, but when you throw it into the word problem, everything fell apart. Like that's the one we've all been classically trained as teachers of how do we deal with these things. And so the traditional bit has been that scaffolding, right? You teach the kid with that scaffold in place. And sometimes it's broken down in the problem. Sometimes it's a separate page. Sometimes it's a poster on the wall, but it's okay. You identify the numbers and then you work your way through it. And that works really well. But what I noticed is like I had my grade 10s come in at the start of the year and I didn't know what scaffolds had been used the previous year. And so we hit that point, and this is when you hit that scaffolds take away too easily, you end up into that idea of learned helplessness because they're seeing that their effort isn't changing the outcomes, that they get that low self-efficacy of I can't do it, and then they give up or zone out.
And I can't pull up the numbers in my mind exactly for you, but the history tells students that the amount of time that you have to wait in a math class for the teacher to help, was minimal. I mean, it was extremely minimal. So that behavior gets internalized rather early.
Yeah, and even I'm guilty of that, knowing that that appropriate wait time is a master skill that every teacher builds, and we still always need to improve it. I'm sure when you've been in coaching on that, even people who have been teaching forever still have those moments of like, wait, you didn't give them enough time to think through their answer there.
Yeah, that's because our focus is on getting to the right answer. Mm-hmm. And almost our ego gets stroked when the kid gets to the right answer, regardless of how they got there.
Yeah, it's tough to really train your mind around the idea that the journey is the most important part of all of this learning. Because you get the kid, why do I ever need to learn this? I'm never going to do blank in the future. But you are wiring the pathways in your brain for problem solving. You are building that resilience, that grit, all of those like wonderful traits we look for. They require this. And I think it's the best part of a broad educational background and broad educational setting where we don't allow kids to specialize early, because you never know what subject is going to help them grow the most in the area that's most important to them.
In the piece that you had on LinkedIn, you described that the student reactions aren't signs of inability, but patterns shaped by those past experiences. With over scaffolding, that's kind of the part we're hitting here. Answer first instruction and environments where mistakes felt high risk. What do you mean by answer first instruction?
Well, I think that's any sort of like place where the answer is the most important part. We don't talk about the process. We're not grading the process. We're grading the final results. And in places with high stakes testing, that's your IGCSEs or it's your DP exams, it's your SATs, all of those things do not put any value on the process. And so that's what our kids are training for. And it doesn't matter what system you're in, we all have those standardized exams that don't value the process. And so somewhere along the way of instruction, we lose that focus on process and really start to put that answer as the most important thing, even if it's only subconsciously in the teacher's mind, because you want the kids to be successful on whatever test it might be.
And you described environments where mistakes felt high risk. How do you think we end up getting to that? I don't think there's any teacher who's attacking that purposefully. Nobody's purposely trying to make that environment where I'm gonna scare you into learning or working harder. So how do we get to that sense of fear of making mistakes?
I sometimes wonder that a lot myself, and for those who don't know me, I teach also in the IB diploma program. I have both a physics and a chemistry section. And so when we have very full curriculums, we don't have a lot of time for that relearning that sometimes needs to take place. And so I think that's where those high risk environments kind of grow up, is that we have a finite amount of time. We have a large amount of material and skills to teach. And at some point, we all make that decision of, is it more valuable to go back and reteach these basics that X percentage of my students need to know? Or do I have to move on to make sure that I give the best full broad coverage of everything for the other students? And at the end, it becomes a bit of high risk, that one, because you don't get the second chance that you might want.
You trigger that for me. It's almost the teacher being in the high risk that passes the high risk on to the kids.
It sometimes is. And those are all external to the classroom, which makes them really hard to make effective systematic changes within the classroom, within your students and all of that. And I've tried through things like, allowing retests, through demonstrations of improved skill before we schedule a new opportunity, all of the positive mindset language of, okay, you're not there yet, but how do we get you there next? And unfortunately, I almost feel like that's had a counterintuitive approach with some of my students, in that like taking some of that stress off at the wrong place, they don't put the effort in as well. And I'm still looking at trying to gather enough data for this, but I don't know if it's been beneficial, because the results don't seem to look that way.
The pressure off, but the effort on is the challenge. Huh?
That would be the holy grail that we're looking for, right? Finding that intrinsic motivation in all the students. It's everything we're all trying to do. I don't think there's a single teacher out there who enjoys what they do, who isn't trying to do this, but we're all struggling.
Yeah. It's almost like the learning, the learning or the mastery needs to become the reward, or the where the student's getting this sense of satisfaction from pulling off the mastery, rather than, I don't have the right words. It's like getting the right answer isn't where the satisfaction comes from. It's figuring out the right answer is where the student needs to find the satisfaction.
Yeah, and it's a struggle. And we're now getting into about a month away from the end of semester. And I wrote that post sort of reflecting on the end of a first quarter. I did have some success. I think some of the things that I was able to do was I listened to some of the scaffolds they had been using before, and I brought those back, but under conditions. I redid the curriculum that I was working with and chose a different sort of set of slides and practice problems for teaching the content. And this is a good time to give a shout out to the New Jersey Center for Teaching and Learning, who makes some wonderful material available for all maths and sciences completely free. It gave me a great foundation to make a really big change easy. And where it worked out well is that these questions that I was using were scaffolded in their own way. They were grouped by topic, so we had chunking happening. They were scaffolded as they got more difficult as we go along. And you get down to the end where we're having a full holistic review without the scaffolds. And that's normally where I found my students falling apart, because they're taking it away. But by working through those processes and, each subtopic pulling the scaffolds away a little bit further and further, we switched over to our chemistry subtopic, and everybody is probably a grade level higher on our scale here, because they kind of knew what to expect. Even though the themes changed from physics to chemistry, the process we were using didn't. And I went back to all those elementary and middle school techniques that we were, ask three before me. I put big whiteboards out on each group table, and before they could call me over for a question, I needed to see visually that everybody at that group of four had put down their thoughts of what they think needed to be happening. I didn't make it easy to come to me. I had to, and I'm still training myself on this one, the response to, is that right? Became, you tell me, which became shorthand for use your processing, the steps that we've used, walk me through your problem solving, and you tell me how you got to your answer, and then you tell me if you feel confident in it. And it took a lot of work.
So I was going to ask the question, what do your students need to learn how to do? Because it sounds like you were modeling for them, or the scaffolds were providing for them, eventually the things they needed to do themselves when the scaffolds were gone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, and what they need to learn is what we're all trying to teach them. But the thing that kind of clicked into my brain as I was getting ready for our conversation today is, in my 12 years now of teaching, I have had countless administrators come in for observations. And one of the questions is always, how do you differentiate? What are your scaffolds are you using for your students? I have never once been asked, what is the exit strategy for those scaffolds? And I went back and I looked at some of my teaching college notes because I still had them. And it was, everything was scaffolds were meant to be temporary. It's right there in the notes that I have from Teachers College going back 13 years ago. Love the digital age. I can pull those things up. And never once in my professional career was that side given any sort of airtime or any kind of focus. We've all been told about all the differentiation techniques we can use, all the different ways we can scaffold things. We can do it visually. We can do it with like checklists and so on and so on and so on. Not once has there ever been anything about how to get rid of them. How do we move past them?
And how and when, and actually teaching the student the purpose of the scaffold.
Yeah.
We're scaffolding your learning. We're scaffolding how to learn, and not scaffolding getting to the answer. Does that phrase work?
Yeah, I think that's it. And this has led to some really interesting conversations with my peers here, my colleagues, because we're all dealing with the same thing, but nobody's been talking about it. And when I brought up this idea of like, what's the exit strategy? You could see a light bulb come on as people realize like, oh, I don't have one. And there's no judgment on that because that's a product of the system that we're working in. Sometimes it takes, the village to come up with the right idea to move us forward. And so going forward from here, I'm going to be asking a lot of people, including my learning services team, my learning specialists, about what can I do to learn more about exit strategies on my scaffolds? How do I make sure that when I get my kids to the end of the year, their assessments, that their sort of grade of what they are able to do in our mastery-based programming reflects what they can do without the scaffolds? And maybe that also includes putting together a bit of a note that I pass on to the next teacher of these were the scaffolds that I used along the way. If they regress, if they find that they're struggling a bit more, these are comfortable tools for them. Maybe that gets built into a school-wide document. I don't know. But for the first time in this year of dealing with this, I now feel like I've actually got partners to work in.
I'll tell you, I'm so glad that I sent you a note and asked you to connect. I've been at coaching for a whole lot of years, and boy, no one's ever come to me with that question of how do I begin to take the scaffold away. Now, I can tell you the one that I pushed is I started pushing years ago, that I thought it was more often that we had a problem from teachers over scaffolding than from under scaffolding.
And I believe it, because when you scaffold for your differentiated learners, you're building the scaffold for generally your weakest student. You want to make sure that they're there. And then a phrase that written down in my teaching college notes of what's good for one is good for all. So suddenly you've got these scaffolds that you've built for your language learning student who doesn't know the definitions of words, or the student with dysnumeria, dyscalculia.
Yeah.
All of those things are there. And made me realize how many students I had sort of robbed of the opportunity to build those problem solving skills. And what did that mean for the students that I had sent on to universities elsewhere where they don't have those scaffolds?
Yeah. 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 So if we look at it, the skills for the kids to develop, the empowerment, I'm kind of seeing the empowerment two ways. One is, um, if I need the scaffold, do I know how to go about requesting it, finding it, getting the support that I need? But then also recognizing the need to push myself to the next step. I know there's, I know there's a, I know there's a skateboard, there's a skateboard video clip to be looking at here as to when does the new learner scaffold the new piece they're learning,
Yeah.
and when do they know to let go of that scaffolding? Because if I don't let go of the scaffolding, I can't go on to the next piece.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid what we've done is teach the kids the safety isn't hanging on to the scaffolding, hanging on to the
Yeah.
support, and missing that next growth piece.
It's like almost like we're all riding bikes around with training wheels on. We've
Yeah,
never gotten to the
that's
stage where
drums
those
in
have
my
come
head.
off.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's interesting because again, this all sort of then ties into that learned helplessness that I thought was the initial problem. It wasn't. It's definitely like there's underlying causes to this, but that learned helplessness, when you have these kids who are getting these repeated failures from these systematic issues, then they get this I can't do attitude. They're going to give up. They're going to zone out. They're going to wait for the teacher to take up the answer. They're going to write it down and they're going to feel like, oh, I can do that because I saw how it was done.
yeah,
And it's the transition from that I see to I do where we reinforce that cycle. And we're not going to get out of it unless we have a supportive culture within the classroom, but also within amongst teachers, because, it's not easy for me to sit there and say, like, there are students there that I have had in the past who I now know that I've failed, and those problem solving issues that they went onwards, I contributed to them. I didn't necessarily start them. I didn't make them necessarily better or worse, but I definitely contributed somewhere in there. So we got to have that supportive culture. We need to make sure we're putting that focus on our effort and process and work on, I guess, teaching resilience, if you want that buzzword to fly in there, because it is changing that idea of I can't to I could try whatever strategy they want to use.
yeah. Yeah. I worked with a advanced math teacher, and his statement to the kids were, "If I send you to the board to do a problem that you know how to do, I've wasted your time."
Yeah.
So he knew. He communicated to the students, "I'm looking at you. I'm thinking about what you know, and I've picked this problem purposely for you because I think you're not walking up to it knowing how to do it." Now, I got a belief that you can figure it out. You can struggle with it. That's where my belief is in with you.
Mm-hmm.
But if I sent you up there to illustrate that you can already do this, that we don't have the time in the classroom for that.
Yeah, and my saying that kind of parallels along that amongst my physics class at least is I always joke with the reason why physics is spelt with a P instead of an F is because that P is for the partial points you're going to get to make yourself successful.
That's great. That's
Right?
great.
It's not about getting the right answer. It's about building the process along the way, trying something maybe a little bit unique. And then if it doesn't work out at the end, we've still learned something. We've learned that law of physics doesn't apply in that direction, or mathematically there is an issue, but maybe that process actually works when we bring in the right math tool. What works for algebra doesn't necessarily work for when we hit calculus, but there's things that calculus can do so much better than the algebra could.
Yeah. It seems to me that one of the challenges for us is as we develop these skills in our students, the payoff in their grade doesn't likely show up early on.
Yeah, and
And so
that
we have
becomes
to,
tough.
yeah, yeah. So we got to be able to point out to students what they're learning from a skills vantage point. We need to be reinforced that what we're doing is getting us the payoff, and then believe that increased academic success comes later.
Yeah, and I can almost hear everybody who's listening to this thinking about those parent emails and phone calls coming in about,
Absolutely.
what do you mean my kid's grade is going to get worse for the next 3 months while we focus on this because they're applying to this school or they are trying to do that? Like,
I don't
there
think they're
is
great. I don't think their grade has to get worse.
no, but
But
sometimes it
you may,
does. Learning,
but
learning new
sure,
strategies, learning how to
sure.
focus through this does take some minor setbacks. Growth is never fully
Yeah,
linear.
yeah.
Um, it's my favorite one for this is there's a graph that gets shared around as a meme about learning a second language, and like, yeah, overall it's a nice overall growth, but there's some really big regressions along the way where you can have one day where you're speaking fluently and then the next day you can barely string a sentence together. That's learning, and
Yeah.
we have to recognize that setbacks, whether they're documented as grades or not, are part of the process. That's part of learning, trying and failing and growing from that failure. And if we're too scared as parents, as caregivers, as teachers, to have those grades recorded as setbacks along the way, we're never going to come to the moment of working through the pain to get to the goal on the other side.
So we really got to live through the same perseverance for growth that we're hoping to develop for the kids. We need to take
And
the time, the trial and error, the reflection.
just like we would expect a math teacher to model the math problem on the board, the English teacher to model how you put together a paragraph, all of those things we're modeling for the students. We need to be able to model this development of perseverance and grit and dealing with the stumblings, being able to say in the middle of a lesson, you know what, guys, this is not working the way we hope it is. Let us try and reset this, and we'll come back next class with a different approach. That
Well,
scaffold didn't work, or we took that scaffold away too soon. However we want to name it in front of them, it's humbling. But I
so
think
it's making them more of a partner in the learning process. Almost, I can point out that my thought was this was going to provide this, and it didn't. Just the way you thought this approach to a formula was going to take you there, and it didn't.
yeah, it's all there. And my biggest one with my grade 11 and 12 students in the diploma program is, okay, so we get to a bad test, and so your preparation and your study skills, what you were doing to get here, didn't work out. What change are you going to make to expect a different result the next time? Because we've already proven that pathway didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we learn from it? Because that's the growth we need.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I knew that I was going to enjoy it, and you certainly delivered. I'm just wondering, is LinkedIn the best place for people to touch base with you if they got questions or would like to follow the conversation along further?
Yeah, and if anybody has some strategies or some ideas or some recent research that goes along this way, I'm just starting in this journey. And so anybody who's a few steps ahead, if they want to give me a bit of guidance, I'd love to hear it as well.
I will keep on the lookout for that for myself as well as for you. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barkley, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barkleypd.com.